Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be doing my 14.17 ADC tier list. So for general content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes this patch. We saw buffs towards Varus, Caitlyn, and we saw nerfs towards Ashe, Ezreal, and Seraphine, which all had some sort of impact on the patch on the whole. Obviously, the big change here is that Fleets got pretty heavily nerfed. If the champion didn't have a great substitute rune, then they definitely lost a lot of power from that. Also, we saw nerfs towards both Cut Down and Absorb Life. Absorb Life is basically unusable now. It is in a very bad state, especially for bot lane, where it's been pushed towards level scaling quite aggressively, and obviously as ADC you don't get as many levels, so that definitely does hurt quite a bit here. So let's go with the tier list. We're going with the D tier, going to consist of mainly the same things. Both Corki and Tristana have basically been nuked out of the ADC role. Their mid lane presence in competitive has hurt them pretty poorly here, and it's just left them in a really rough spot in the ADC role. Maybe going into next split, we'll see some sort of adjustments, like overall towards the system, to allow ADCs like Tristana, Corki, and then some of the other pro-skewed ADCs to like thrive once again. But right now they're really underperforming, so they belong in the D tier. Senna, although the support builds are still doing really well, the Echoes of Helia, the Cleavers, some of the different rune variations you can opt into there, she hasn't really found success as an ADC once again, whether that be like the lethality variations which are underperforming, or the Kraken Slayer variations like the on-hit kind of stuff, just hasn't really been picking up that well. So she belongs towards the high end of the D tier, but definitely relatively unpopular and just not that performant in general. Kalista obviously scales quite aggressively with rank, as this is once again targeted towards mid elo, like gold towards diamond zone. Kalista tends to underperform a bit here, but does quite aggressively jump up the higher up you go. But for the moment, she has been pretty heavily nerfed because of competitive, and is also just kind of not doing as well as she probably should be doing in the higher elo, so she finds herself within the D tier for the mid elo tier list. Varus has been moved up, so he won't be included in the D tier. The C tier is going to consist of relatively similar champions as well. We have Vayne, who hasn't really found her footing ever since the nerfs directed towards her solo lane power. She could probably do with a bit within the bot lane to kind of once again find her traction, but she's definitely not unplayable. She has a spot within the bot lane, whereas I know a lot of people would definitely just like completely writing this champion off. She's a bit more performant than some of the other options, but she is still pretty low down. Like you would want to pick other things over her. She's short range, primarily just single target damage. There's a lot of burst in the game at the moment, and if you're not getting your items like your shield bows, your jack shows, arguably stuff like that later on to your build, you can feel really squishy. It can be quite difficult to really snowball on this champion. Aphelios is in a pretty balanced state. If you put a lot of games into this champion, you'll be very much rewarded for it. He's not really going to rise out of the C tier for the average tier list, but like if you put the games in, you sink the time in, you go into a higher elos, this champion will definitely become a bit more performant. He's not currently meta, but he definitely sits as like a fringe A tier pick in high elo, where the people have put the time into learning the champion and know how to utilize his abilities and like weapon rotations. Xayah, I'm not a huge fan of Xayah at the moment. She's received, I believe, 2 lots of buffs this split, but the itemization's been pretty poor for her. She has indirectly been hit by a lot of the system nerfs, system adjustments, things like lethal tempo being removed definitely hurt her quite a bit. Halo Blades being now for range champions kind of removed that as being an option for her. And overall, yeah, she sits within the C tier at the moment. I'm not particularly happy with where this champion is, and it'd be nice to see some sort of buffs. Maybe after Worlds, if she is buffed going into Worlds, she could definitely like really see a lot of traction there. Ezreal, arguably over nerfed now. Like the 2 base AD just wasn't really needed. I'm pretty sure it was like to avoid a mid lane Ezreal taking over, as that was something some people were playing within competitive. For average elos, Ezreal tends to be a bit underperformant, as obviously he has a very high skill curve. Like if you can master this champion and you're like consistently landing all of his abilities, finding these kill angles, then he can be incredibly powerful within games. And yeah, it mainly comes down to that. It's just general experience with the game and like landing your skill shots and then utilizing the full extent of his kit. But the 2 base AD definitely takes them from like a high C tier to like a mid C tier, but there is a lot of champions in the C tier to begin with, so yeah, he kind of sits here still at the moment. Moving on to the B tier, there's definitely some underperformers here. Samira is getting buffed in 14.18, generalistically just underperforming at the moment. However, if you do snowball, then you can definitely take over games as this champion, but the build isn't as strong as it has been. She isn't as strong as she has been in the past. She did get nerfed a couple of times, I believe, going into this split. But things like Collector, a bit weaker. I got tagged slightly, but not a huge amount. It's still one of the stronger marksman items at the moment. Shieldbow being nerfed in 14.18 will hurt her. BT being nerfed in 14.18 will also hurt her quite a bit. So I imagine she'll tread water next patch, possibly even power down. But for the moment, yeah, she's definitely not performing to the level which I know a lot of people would hope she would. Sivir, very easy to pilot champion, often just built around her farming, but the static shift nerfs combined with some of the other system nerfs definitely tagged her a bit, so she sits towards the end of the B tier. Also a champion which I do believe should probably be like an A tier, close to S tier pick, especially within like mid elos. Lucian, the changes obviously were power neutral, but some of his itemization is weaker, whether that's like the Bork variation or just the Kraken Slayer variations. I know a lot of people like lean into Essence Reaver now, but there are different build options for him. He is just a bit underperforming at the moment, so he also sits within the B tier. Draven, arguably harder to pilot than Samira, but in a bit better of a spot. He sits towards the high end of the B tier, whereas Samira sits towards the low end of the B tier at the moment. Yasuo definitely took a bit of a tag with Fleet being nerfed this patch. He was someone who obviously uses that, but the changes towards some of the other systems in 14.18 could definitely see him go back up to being like an A tier pick. For the moment, though, he does sit within the B tier. Zeri lost power because of static and fleet being nerfed. She was very much using those to like keep her up. She is obviously still pretty strong in elite play at the moment, but for more average elos, yeah, she sits more towards the B tier in her current state. Ziggs and Veigar, I'm going to move up towards the A tier now. Both these champions benefiting quite heavily from all the nerfs to the other champions within the ADC role, whether that's through runes, items, direct nerfs, stuff like that have all pretty heavily like compressed the ADC role back down, and it's definitely given way to some of the mages which are now doing a bit better within the within solo queue. I know some of these picks, obviously Ziggs is doing quite well in competitive at the moment. He's pretty, I believe he's getting close to pickle ban there, and is being nerfed in 14.18, but for the moment he now moves up to the A tier, especially mid elo. And Twitch I'm going to bring up to the A tier as well. He's doing a bit better now that some of the other champions has been nerfed. Obviously he doesn't run fleet, so he isn't directly hit by that. Bork, albeit was nerfed, it was fairly like neutral compared to the other nerfs towards like static and Kraken, which arguably got hit the most out of the three items. And Twitch, yeah, goes back up from like a high B tier to like a low A tier pick. If you can snowball on this champion, he can definitely be really valuable and do a lot of damage within games. The Caitlyn changes, pretty placebo from what it seems now. It was attack speed ratio, it was an increase to attack speed ratio, and it was some trap scaling changes where they changed how it scales throughout the game. I believe it's a bit lower cooldown earlier on to the game and like a pretty neutral later on. I think that was what the changes were, but overall, yeah, it ended up being pretty like the changes were basically nothing, and she sits within the low A tier still. If you get the items on her, she can be really oppressive early on to the game, and then spikes really aggressive later on to the game when you have like 4 items and you can comfortably one tap people with like trap combos. Caitlyn definitely can sit in a really good spot at the moment if you get the items and like you're moving the champion around the map, making sure you're getting resources on it. Smolder, towards the low end of the A tier, it's pretty close to the B tier. In fact, he is being nerfed in 14.18 because of his solo lane dominance at the moment. If you play him into matchups where you can free stack, this champion is incredibly valuable. He's not doing as performant in the bot lane at the moment, but if you get online, you get your stacks, you're playing the champion correctly, he can definitely be really valuable within a lot of team comps and be a really good win con. So yeah, he sits as like a low A tier option, but overall raw power can drop down a bit if you're not getting like your stacks and you're not getting to your execute threshold consistently. Kai'Sa has different build variations, which really benefits her at the moment. She has been nerfed in like items and systems. Obviously she can opt into like PTA, Fleet, Taylor Blades. I believe that tends to be her primary keystones off the top of my head. But at the moment, yeah, she's doing a bit worse, but still doing a bit better than some of the other options, and just not like towards the same level of dominance you were seeing towards the beginning of this split, where like the Ginsu's, I believe it was the static Ginsu's Nashor variant, was like really overperforming, and like a lot of people were finding success on it. Jinx, so there is a new Jinx build. Obviously, I believe Reptile and one other ADC player are trying to popularize it at the moment, and that is like the collector opportunity, more to remind a trio of items, as it enables her to have a lot of damage. She doesn't really value attack speed as much, albeit in 14.18 she is getting an attack speed growth buff, which will definitely help those build variations. It'll help both build variations, in fact, but she definitely has like other options open to her. You can definitely pick depending on what you need within the game. Like some games just won't really be that great for lethality variations if the enemy is stacking a lot of armor, but sometimes you can opt into it and definitely find it a lot of success, especially if you're snowballing with Collector, which can be a really valuable item in those scenarios. Hui, I'm so close to moving Hui up to the S tier. I think this champion is in an amazing spot for the bot lane at the moment, and the 14.18 changes will be even better for him. I am confident I'm going to move him up in next patch at least, where he is gaining more shield for allies on his WW. But for the moment, yeah, really slept on pick, definitely deserves to be played a bit more here. And yeah, I believe him to be like a really solid A tier pick. I think he's better in the bot lane role than he is in the mid lane at the moment. People just haven't really caught on, and like when they do, it definitely get played a lot more. Or not, honestly. Like mages have been strong for a while in the bot lane, and people really don't like moving over to them, mainly because they just want to play ADC in the ADC role. So that tends to be how it goes for the most part. In Nyla's case, she's great with certain pairings. Obviously, I speak about this all the time. If you can find those situations where she can be really valuable within the draft, she is one of the best picks in the game. More generalistically, she can definitely struggle, especially if she's not snowballing when she is like Collector, for example, and she isn't paired with the right picks. She can definitely struggle to find tempo within the game. But yeah, if you get these pairings down, you're getting ahead in the game, and you're playing her in the right spot. She can be a really valuable pick to most drafts. Kog'Maw, also really close to the S tier. Both Hui and Kog'Maw, I think, are the two closest picks at the moment. Kog'Maw obviously got nerfed by the bulk changes, but then didn't get affected by the fleet changes. PTA was his main keystone, and it still is. I know some people are playing like AP variations of Kog'Maw in the bot lane. I haven't just looked into it too much, but there's definitely potential there, as like some of the itemization is quite good for him at the moment. I know in one of the in-houses we played recently, Vigar V2 brought out the AP Kog'Maw as an answer to Hui, I want to say, and was finding a lot of success on that pick. But it is definitely a bit more situational, not something you can really default on as much, but the pick is very close to the S tier at the moment. Swain, also really solid A tier pick. Not quite as high as I'd argue Hui and Kog'Maw, as he's a lot more situational. You'd need really short range drafts where you can utilize the full value of your kit to output a lot of damage, maintain R uptime. But if you find these angles, he can be really valuable towards drafts. Ashe, I'm going to move down to the B tier, and actually I've forgotten to include Varus here. So lethality Varus is incredibly dominant in Elite. It is arguably the best ADC pick in Elite play at the moment, where there's a lot more control. You're able to get your damage down, and you can be really valuable with it. Within average play, it's still his best build, which is crazy, because lethality Varus, if it's his best build in average play, that means it is just extraordinarily overpowered in like competitive and high elo. I would recommend playing this champion at the moment if you're confident. If you're not that confident and you're not the game pace is just too fast and you're not really able to get the damage down and you're not really getting the angles to play it, you can still opt into on hip. It's just not going to be anywhere near as successful. But the pick is in a really good spot for Elite. It's definitely the kind of thing you can sink time into on this patch, albeit the patch finishes fairly soon, and he is being nerfed quite aggressively in 14.18 to the point where you probably just won't want to play him again. So take that information as you will. He's in a very strong spot at the moment, just not as good for average play. In Ashe's case, she's actually lost a lot of power from her nerfs this patch. She's definitely been on a downwards trend as well. She actually has been finding just a lot of dominance in competitive for a champion, which should on average just be a bit more low elo solo queue bound, as she's very simple to pilot, tends to be one of those more traditionally perceived easier to play champs, kind of akin to MF, who is also in a pretty strong competitive spot at the moment. She is also being nerfed in 14.18, but one of the ADCs I'd definitely recommend going to. next to Jin. Jin also very strong, isn't being nerfed in 14.18. He will be the go-to AD marksman, I believe, in competitive and in solo queue, unless other AD marksman, like another AD marksman, suddenly takes his spot. Maybe pro players like perceive Caitlyn's buffs as being like really competitively skewed and start picking her up. I don't believe that to be true, but Jin also has Dark Harvest as a solid keystone option. Fleet is being nerfed in 14.18, so I would very much recommend going the Dark Harvest route, and he's in a really strong spot at the moment. And then the three mages, Karthus and Brand, both still remain in my S tier. Both are really valuable either for their global presence in Karthus' case and just his raw damage output. In Brand's case, his damage over time and DPS in team fights can be absurdly high, especially if you're able to consistently land multiple R's onto multiple people and you're able to get consistent spreads, primarily into like melee team compositions. Then yeah, he can be really valuable. In Seraphine's case, she drops down from the S+ tier to the S tier. The nerfs is patched to her W, hurt her a bit, and it just makes it so she isn't like head and toes above the rest of the competition. She's more in line with some of the other S tier picks. She's still strong. You can definitely find success playing this champion, especially into compositions where your W has a lot of value. Maybe that's into like multiple dots champions, or whether you can just get a lot of value out of your ultimate as well, being able to consistently hit it onto multiple targets. The champion can still be really valuable in a lot of situations. And overall, those are my thoughts on the 14.17 ADC tier list. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.